So hi everyone, good evening. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mordy Levine. Welcome to the story of the Buddha and what did he really teach? So I'm the president of Jigme Lingpa Center, a nonprofit Buddhist center in San Diego, led by Lama Lanang. I've been a Buddhist my entire adult life, and I can't imagine how my life would have been had I not been lucky enough to be introduced to Buddhism. I teach this class and a variety of other classes with the hope that it can help someone else as well. So if you have a question or I'm speaking too quickly, then just type it in the chat box and I'm happy to slow down. So what was going on during the time that Buddha lived? And what did Buddha really say? What did he really teach? And the fact of the matter is, we don't know. We have really good idea of what he taught. A lot of scholars have done an incredible amount of research based upon what was written down, but nothing was written down at the time that he lived. It actually took several hundred years for his teachings to be written down. Until that time, it was memorized and repeated over and over again. So we have a really good idea of it, but we weren't there. No recording devices, wasn't written down at the time. So what was going on during the time that Buddha lived? How was Buddha different from the schools and the teachings that were going on when he was alive? So there were plenty of ascetics roaming around that part of the world. Those who are ascetics, for those of you that don't know, are people that abstain from pleasure. There are many schools, many teachers. People would roam around following teachers, looking for teachers. There were debates among teachers and their students, and that was like a big deal. The Buddhist texts identify 6 pre-Buddhist schools at the time. This was also before Hinduism, and some scholars say there were many more than that. But here we're just going to talk briefly about some of the 6 schools that were around at the time, just to give us a flavor for the environment that Buddha grew up in. So the first school, it's called Purana Kassapa. It's in English, amoralism. They said there are no moral laws, nothing is moral or immoral. There is neither virtue nor sin. What a great school. The second school, Makali Gosala, they believed in fatalism, determinism, that everything is the consequence of nature and its laws. It's all predetermined, no free will. Karma and consequences are not due to free will. School number 3, Ajita Kasakambali, they believed in materialism. They denied there's any afterlife, no reincarnation, no karma. Everything, including humans, is composed of elemental matter. And when you die, you return to those elements. So what you see is what you get. The fourth school, Pakuta Kachayana, they denied that there is a creator or a knower. They believe that everything is made of 7 basic building blocks that are eternal. They're not created. They're not caused to be created. All actions, including death, are a rearrangement of those building blocks. The fifth school, Mahavira, it's also called Jainism, which is obviously around today. And their teachings were avoid all evil. Jains at the time believed in ahimsa, a nonviolence, aparigraha, which is non-attachment, and asceticism, abstinence from sensual pleasures. So there's a lot of similarity there between Jainism and Buddhism, of course, and the nonviolence and non-attachment. Last school, Sanjaya Balatiputta, they believed in absolute agnosticism. They refused to have any opinion either way about existence or non-existence of an afterlife, karma, good, evil, free will. They said, we don't know. That was their stance. So the differentiating factors, as you can see, were people would teach and believed in a self or no self. They believed in a God, an all-knowing entity, or not. They had extreme beliefs like nihilism, nothing exists, versus materialism. No ramifications to what one does versus enjoy what you can do, whatever you can now. Is there karma? Can karma be changed? So these were topics at the time. Asceticism, very popular. Abstinence from sensual pleasures. And in that environment, as the story goes, Siddhartha Gautama was born in Nepal. And he grew up a son of a clan chief in the 5th century BC. Some stories indicate he was born to a king, but the historians, it's common knowledge that for that time period, he was really part of a clan that was led by a chief. And interestingly enough, the chief was elected by the people. They had no electoral college. So not sure what those elections look like. I am sure they look very different than our elections. So yeah, his father was a chieftain elected by the people, and that changed every 4 to 6 years. So one day, Gautama, who was kind of, we know him as a prince, took a trip outside of his father's home where he was secluded and prevented from seeing the outside world. He witnessed things he had never seen before. He witnessed a dead body, a diseased body, old aging body, and he was very moved by it all. And after seeing these 3 upsetting sights, he came upon a 4th sight, which was an ascetic, someone who had devoted himself to finding the cause of human suffering. Now, this 4th sight gave him hope that he too might be released from the sufferings arising from being repeatedly reborn, and he resolved to follow that ascetic's example. So he left the palace, left his father's house, and he fasted nearly to death by starvation. At the time, he was following a teacher, regarded extreme austerities as the way to go, self-mortification. And after doing that for years, he said that's useless or unnecessary in attaining enlightenment, which eventually led to a path that emphasized living a life according to the middle way between the extremes of hedonism and self-mortification. So after 6 years of searching, studying with many teachers, Gautama found enlightenment while meditating under a Bodhi tree, which is still there now in Bodh Gaya, India. And according to Buddhist texts, he sat there in his seat meditating without moving for 49 days until he achieved enlightenment. Excuse me. And after his enlightenment, his first teachings were very simple. It's aspects of basic human condition contain suffering and dissatisfaction and unhappiness, which can be eliminated. The causes of this unhappiness are our craving, our desires, our attachments. We grasp at people, situations, or things to stay the same if we like them or change if we don't. Sound familiar? Our unhappiness or suffering results from our misunderstanding of how the world or reality really works. Taoist is basic teaching in a nutshell, and it still is today. So more formally, a lot of you folks know this, but just for those that don't, his first teaching were something called the 4 Noble Truths. So why noble? Well, the truths, and keep in mind, this is a translation from the original Pali. The truths or realities for the spiritually worthy ones. That's what noble means in this case. Spiritually worthy. And truth number 1, we suffer. And that's a translation. The Pali is called dukkha, and lots of different translations. So the most common one is suffering, that we suffer. Other translations say we are disappointed, we are dissatisfied, we're incapable of satisfying ourselves. So that's truth number 1. Truth number 2, the good news is there is a cause to our suffering. So we know that. Number 3, we can stop our suffering. And number 4, there's a path to stop our suffering. And he named the path, he called it the Eightfold Path. And when I first learned the 4 Noble Truths, I was put off by the word suffering. So I want to talk about this for a little bit. When I learned these teachings, I didn't believe I was suffering, or I didn't know I was suffering. And suffering was one of many words that were used to translate the Pali word dukkha. Now, we have many other words. So in my life, I didn't view my life as one of suffering.
Mordy, would you
Yeah,
mind sleeping down, talking slower?
yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry, thanks. So in my life, I didn't feel that I was suffering. I just went back and forth between times of pleasure and times of dissatisfaction. But I didn't really view myself suffering. I was living in America, like most people my age, just having a good time, trying to. But my state of mind was totally dependent on how the circumstances surrounding my life were going. So whether I was experiencing pleasure or dissatisfaction was totally dependent on how the circumstances surrounding my life were going. Key point: if I was making money, I was happy. If I had a job I liked, I was happy. If I had a great social life, happy. If there was an illness in the family, not happy. Girlfriend broke up with me, not happy. So, very simple equation. My feelings of happiness were all subject to my perceptions of what was going on around me. Was I suffering? Once again, that's a word that we use now to translate what the Buddha taught. I would prefer to say I was vacillating back and forth depending on circumstances. So, depending on circumstances, my state of mind was tied to that, to what was going on around me. Big mistake. That means you have no no control over how you feel. You're having a good day because things around you are working out, great. You're having a bad day, things aren't going your way, then you don't feel so good. No control. So how I found Buddhism was through a karate class. It was a Japanese karate class, very traditional Japanese karate. And Japanese karate is an expression of Zen Buddhism. So when I was in graduate school, I made friends with someone who said to me, "Hey, I teach a karate class and it's free. You want to try it?" And my response was, "Sure, why not?" So 15 minutes into the first class, I was in big trouble. I didn't know how I was going to make it through. It was hard. It was really hard. And I vowed not to come back. But I finished the class. And I noticed for the next few hours after class that the circumstances around me did not dictate how I felt. So it wasn't just doing an exercise or an intense exercise with a focused mind. I was doing an intense exercise with a focused mind, and I was actually meditating under a stressful environment. Of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. All I knew is after karate class, for hours and sometimes days, I was almost immune to feeling unhappy when circumstances didn't go well around me. So this led me to my interest in Zen Buddhism, which eventually led me to where I am now, 40 years later, a student and a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism. So getting back to the Buddhist teachings, I wanted to give you a flavor for the word dukkha or suffering, because everyone might have a different experience that applies to them. The Buddhist solution to suffering or dissatisfaction or disappointment was follow his prescription. It's just like a doctor. Here's your prescription. Then the prescription was called the Eightfold Path. So we're going to just review that briefly. And once again, I know some of you are very familiar with this, so we'll move through it pretty lightly. Why did he call it a prescription? Well, the Buddha used the analogy of a medical doctor treating patients. Patients who had illnesses that were diagnosable and had specific remedies. The remedies were to heal all living beings from a life of dissatisfaction. And those remedies were called the Eightfold Path. And it teaches the ideals for ethical conduct, mental discipline, and achieving wisdom. So, number one, right understanding. Well, that's pretty pithy. What does that mean? An accurate understanding of the nature of things. So two of the main aspects of right understanding include the concept of impermanence. That's the first concept, first main aspect, which we know on an intellectual level that life changes and is impermanent. But nevertheless, we are always surprised when it changes in a way we didn't like or expect. So if you have a job loss or an illness, leads to dissatisfaction, sometimes intense dissatisfaction, sometimes really suffering. But once we truly understand impermanence, it's less of an issue. Changes are taken in stride, and seemingly unfortunate changes are like water off a duck's back. Another example of right understanding is how we view ourselves and our sense of self. Do we exist? Do I exist? Do you exist? And for those of you that say we do exist, then as a Buddhist, we would say, well, show me. Show me, where are you? What part of you is yourself? Is it your brain? Is it your body? Is it your mind? Is it all of these things? And they keep changing. Well, which is the real you? Is it yesterday? Was that the real you? Or today? Because today it's different. Your cells have changed. Where is the self? Am I the same I that I was yesterday? So Buddhists believe, or have proven logically, that the self as a solid, unchanging entity does not exist, can't be found or identified. But we also know that there is something there. Just one slap in the face or one punch, and we would all agree that something exists. But we act as though we exist with a sense of permanence and solidity. So the I that we think of as we view ourselves, as we speak, as we interact, is the most important thing for us. And yet it is constantly changing and can't be found or identified as a permanent, solid entity. Why is this so important? Because, very simple, the more you can reduce that strong sense of self or identity that you have, or who you think you are, the more you can easily have compassion for others and not experience suffering or dissatisfaction when it is threatened. So I'm going to say that again. It's a big mouthful. The more you can reduce the sense of self or identity that you have, the more you can easily reduce suffering, dissatisfaction for yourself, and have compassion for others. So if you strongly identify as a Republican and Democrats win, you are very upset, and vice versa. Or your colleagues think you are unprofessional and you regard yourself as very professional, you're upset. The more you strongly identify as something, the harder it is to communicate or deal with anything that threatens that. So that's why it's important to have an understanding that not only is things around us impermanent, always changing, but our sense of self doesn't really exist in the way we think it does. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. I think you'll have a better understanding. Okay. Right thought. Well, avoiding thoughts of attachment, hatred, and harmful intent. The Buddha put a lot of emphasis on our thoughts. And here's why. Here's a quote from the Buddha from a book called the Dhammapada. I'll just read it. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. Okay, what's the other side of that coin? All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him like a shadow that never leaves him. So what does that mean? The interpretation, our happiness is completely reliant on our mind and how we think and manage our thoughts. Our happiness is completely reliant on our mind and how we think and manage our thoughts. Okay. Number 3, right speech. Refraining from verbal misdeeds such as lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, senseless speech. How critical is this teaching today with what's going on in the world? It's crazy. So, in the Jewish religion, by the way, they compare gossip to murder. That's how serious they take right speech. And there's an old Hasidic tale of a villager who is feeling remorse for the harm his gossip had caused his neighbor.
Please, a bit
Okay.
slower.
There's an old Hasidic tale of a villager who is feeling remorse for the harm his gossip had caused his neighbor. So he went to his rabbi to ask advice. And the rabbi suggested that he go to town, buy a chicken, and bring it back to him. And on the way back, he said, pluck all the feathers completely. The man returned with the featherless chicken, and the rabbi told him, retrace your steps and gather every one of those scattered feathers. And the man replied, that would be impossible. By now, the feathers were probably blown all over throughout the neighboring villages. The rabbi nodded in agreement, and the man understood. We can never really take back our words. Very simply, speech has the ability to harm. Okay, number 4, right action and refraining from physical misdeeds such as killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. And there was a monk, Shantideva. He lived in the 8th century, Buddhist philosopher. And his quote, which I enjoy, is about right action and right mindfulness, is, when on the verge of acting, I see my mind is tainted, I should remain immobile like a piece of wood. So when I'm about to act, or I'm thinking about something and I know it's not right speech, right action, he goes, I recognize it, I'm aware, and I remain like a piece of wood. That's his advice. Great advice. I try to use it as much as I can. Next one on the Eightfold Path, right livelihood, avoiding work that directly or indirectly harms others. So if you're in the business, let's say, of making a gun manufacturer or slaughtering animals, things like that, that would not be right livelihood. Right effort, abandoning negative states of mind. Right mindfulness means awareness of the body, of your feelings, your thoughts, your phenomena going on around you. And the last one, right concentration, which means the ability to have single-minded focus. So the core of Buddhism is what Buddha taught right after he became enlightened. The Four Noble Truths, and as part of that, the Eightfold Path. And almost everything we talk about now is somehow related to those teachings. So there's a famous story in the sutras. Sutras are scriptures, many of which are regarded as records of the oral teachings of Gautama Buddha. So there's a famous story in the sutras called the Kalama Sutra. The Buddha enters a town called Kesupada and meets with a group of people called Kalamas. And apparently many teachers of various sects passed through that town quite a bit. And these people were confused. They didn't know what and who to believe because they were hearing all these different teachings. Yes, karma, no karma. Yes, reincarnation, no, and the list goes on and on. This So when the Buddha came through, they asked him how to decide what to believe and who to follow. And his answer was, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by logic, by inference, by analogy, by agreement, through pondering views. Don't go by probability. Don't go by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. So he's not just saying reject tradition, he's also saying don't trust your own logic. So what do you do? How should they decide? How do you know what to believe? He then said, when you know for yourselves that these qualities really means actions or thoughts, are unskillful, or these actions or thoughts lead to harm and to suffering, then you should abandon them. And when you know for yourselves that these qualities or these actions or thoughts are skillful, then you should enter and remain in them. So he's saying you need to use yourself as the guinea pig. Test the teachings on your mind, your speech, and your body, and you decide. So frankly, I love that about Buddhism. He also said, this is from a different sutra, a different scripture. He said, monks and wise men, just as a goldsmith, that's someone who works with gold, would test his gold by burning and cutting and rubbing it, so you must examine my words and accept them, but not merely out of reverence for me. So what does this mean? This means that the Buddha encouraged analyzing his words, just in the same as you would do in science. Critical examination, test it out, and only accept the concept after seeing its validity. That's the only way we can make sure we understand the real meaning. Only then can we use it effectively to transform our minds. This is not religion. This is not rules to follow, just a wise way to lead your life. So the science examination is our own mind. We simply watch our experiences and see what happens. Anyone can do it. Nothing religious about it. And in that same way, the Dalai Lama did something very, similar. Similarly, with the Dalai Lama, he not only, works with thousands of scientists around the world with the Buddhist understanding of the mind, but he's changed some of his own views as well, based upon what they have taught him, because he's just following what the Buddha said. And when the scientists were able to prove something to him and he understood that and agreed with that logic, he abandoned some of his own teachings as well. So what else did the Buddha say? So he said, Buddhists don't believe in a supreme God or deity. We're primarily reliant on our own efforts for evolution to reach enlightenment. Okay. There's no one coming to help us. It's all up to us. The Buddha is considered an extraordinary man, but not a god. The word Buddha, of course, means enlightened. Enlightened because the vast majority of us are in the dark. We're ignorant of how the world really works. Reality is not what we think it is. The world and ourselves is not as solid and as permanent as we think it is. Buddhists are focused on achieving enlightenment, a state of inner peace and wisdom, which can be attained through a deep understanding and practice of the Eightfold Path. And when followers reach a spiritual level, they're said to have experienced nirvana, which can be reached in this lifetime. So just a brief note, there's a very, very big mindfulness movement out there today, right? A lot of people teaching mindfulness in corporations. There's a lot of apps on the phone for mindfulness, and it's great. Only focuses on meditation. And one of the critiques of this movement is that it leaves out the ethical aspects of the Buddhist teachings. So you can be a great meditator based on mindfulness, but still be unhappy, or still be a cruel person, still kill people. But boy, is your mindfulness good. So I just want to compare and contrast the mindfulness movement with Buddhism. Buddhism is a very big piece, and mindfulness is just a very, very narrow portion of it. So some scholars don't recognize Buddhism as an organized religion, but rather a way of life, a spiritual tradition. And as I mentioned earlier, the Buddha encouraged the middle way, avoid self-indulgence, but also self-denial. So just a brief story on the middle way. One of Buddha's students was having difficulty in his meditation, and he happened to be an excellent sitar player. So the Buddha asked him, what happens when the strings on the sitar are too tight? And he said, well, if they're too tight, they break. And then he said, well, what happens if the strings on the sitar are too loose? And he said, well, if they're too loose, they don't play. So that is how to practice meditation. Not too tight, not too loose. Once again, pointing to the middle way. Okay, karma. So Buddhists embrace the concepts of karma, the law of cause and effect, but it is widely misunderstood, even by Buddhists. So karma is based on your motivation behind your thoughts, your speech, your action. So we can apply this to any action which includes thoughts. So karma is based on our motivation. An example of karma, if you help someone.
Hello. Hi.
Slower.
Slower.
Sorry. An example of karma is if you help someone out by giving them money, then you will give someone money again in the future. You will find yourself in an environment where people are generous in giving money. And you will be the recipient of others giving you money in the future. Same is true with actions and speech. Another example, if you shoot someone with a gun, well, you're likely to shoot someone with a gun again. You will, unless you change your karma. You're likely to be shot. You're likely to be in an environment where people shoot each other. If you love someone, you're likely to continue to love someone. You're likely to be loved. You're likely to be in an environment where there's a lot of love. That's karma. Applies to being respectful, applies to speaking poorly of someone else, applies to your thoughts. So does karma ripen immediately? Meaning, do you get that backlash right away? Well, we know sometimes immediately and sometimes in the future, which includes this lifetime or future lifetimes. So you could say that where you find yourself now in life is a result of all of your actions, thoughts, and speech until now. So if you think you're not in a good position about where your life is right now, you have only to look at your actions, your thoughts, and your speech until now. And how you deal with the circumstances around you determines your future. So if you get angry, you're more likely to get angry in the future. You're more likely for someone to be angry at you or be in an angry environment, etc. So Buddhists also talk about how heavy karma can be as well. Different actions have different karmic results. So there's a big difference in karma between murdering someone versus stepping on an ant. So how does karma follow you? Who's keeping score? Who's got a karma app that's keeping track of your thoughts, your speech, and your actions? And the answer is, karma is a law of cause and effect, just like gravity, gravity can be described, it can be measured, it can be predicted. It's a law. Karma is a law as well, far more complex. So can you predict karma in certain cases? Sure. If I punch someone, they're probably going to punch me back right away. If I go to a store and steal something, I'll go to jail. If I yell at you, you're going to yell at me. If I raise my son a certain way, he will be a certain way. So to some degree, yeah, you can predict karma in some cases, but it's not just actions that create karma. It's also tendencies, habits, how I react to circumstances. That is also karma. So if you yell at me, how I react will determine my karma in the future. Things don't go well for me at work. I lose my job. There's an illness. How I react, my tendency, my habit will be karma as well. So the results of your actions are like a shadow. It never leaves you. It's a law, just like gravity. But you can change your habits, which is synonymous with you can change your karma. The same thing. Karma, habits. So great beings, great realized beings like the Buddha, they do have the ability to look at your speech, your action, your thoughts, and tell you what kind of karma that will follow you. Or they can look at what happened to you and tell you that happened to you because. So it's very complex, obviously, and sophisticated, but that's it in a nutshell. Now, Buddhism is a religion of lists, a lot of lists. So far we've seen the Four Noble Truths, we've seen the Eightfold Path, and here are a few more. In the Buddhist teachings, we have something called the Five Poisons. Some different Buddhists call it three poisons. Some have seven poisons. They are the primary causes that keep us suffering or dissatisfied and keep us trapped in this type of existence. And they are ignorance, lack of understanding the way things are. We talked about that, right? Everything is impermanent. And if you think things are permanent and you're going to live forever and you're going to keep that job and you're never going to be sick, then we're ignorant. Attachment. The problem with being attached to a desire is if we don't get it, we're unhappy. And if we get it, it's guaranteed to change, which will make us unhappy. So attachment is a poison. Aversion for what we don't like or for what prevents us from getting what we like. Pride, having an inflated opinion of ourself and a disrespectful attitude toward others. Envy, jealousy, unable to bear the accomplishments or good fortune of others. So we also have the four immeasurables, four Buddhist virtues and meditation practices that cultivate them. Now, what's interesting here is this practice actually came before Buddhism, came before the Buddha, in other teachers that lived at that time. And the Buddha was wise enough to continue to teach it. So loving kindness or benevolence, it means friendliness, goodwill, an active interest in others. Compassion, or karuna, is the desire to remove harm and suffering from others, while loving kindness is really the desire to bring about the well-being and happiness. So they're obviously related. Number 3, empathetic joy, mudita, being happy about someone else's good fortune. And then the 4th one, which is my favorite, is equanimity. When things go well, great. When things don't go well, no problem. We just deal with it, but without it destroying our states of mind. So committed Buddhists do something called taking refuge. It means they commit to relying 100% on the 3 jewels of Buddhism until they become enlightened. The 3 jewels are the Buddha, the Dharma, which are the teachings, and the Sangha. Now, the traditional definition of the Sangha is the community of monks and nuns. In the West, it's quite common to refer to the Sangha as a group of Buddhists. So I'm a member of the San Diego Sangha. That is not the traditional definition. The traditional definition is relying on monks or nuns that have achieved certain level of enlightenment. And there are other variations of the 3 jewels, but this is the most basic. So what does it mean to rely on something? So what do you rely on that you know unfailingly will be there for you, whatever happens? What do you rely on? Do you rely on money? Do you rely on health? Do you rely on your family? Your job? Probably not. Well, money comes and goes. Same with health. Same with family. People die. They move away. People change their minds. So what can you rely on? When you take refuge, it means you can rely 100% on this anywhere, anytime, any situation. So a good exercise to do is when you feel angry or irritated and wish things were different, ask yourself the question, if things changed for the better, can I rely on that? So if I'm short financially, well, maybe if I got some money, that would be great. It'd make me feel better. But what happens if you lose that money again? So these solutions may be true for a short period of time, but they are all circumstantial, not 100%, versus relying on the Buddha, what he taught, and the Sangha. So that's what taking refuge means in Buddhism. So now, fun topic, actually is for many Buddhists, is death. So what dies? Is it the body? Is it the brain? Is it the mind? Is it your spirit, your soul? Well, can you show me your mind? Well, remember that self we were talking about that you can't find or identify? We kind of know it's there, but it's always changing. Does that die? Well, as I mentioned, Buddhists don't believe in a solid self. We don't believe in an unchanging, permanent self. We believe we exist, but not in the way we see ourselves, and certainly not in the way we act. So what Buddhists believe gets reborn is your karma, which is synonymous with habits. What kind of habits? Well, habits are the mind's tendency to react in a situation. So if I have a habit of being kind, that gets reborn. If I have a habit of being fearful when I'm alone, that gets reborn. If I have a habit of being organized or sloppy or anxious when I meet new people, or I'm not able to control my eating, my drinking, my anger, all the ways I react when I'm triggered, small triggers, large triggers, that's what gets reborn into a new body. Where? Where? So karma is, the teaching is that the karma is in our consciousness. So we have the consciousness records, keeps track of this, the universe together with our consciousness, the big mind, the small mind, and that's what gets reborn. So Buddha accepted the concepts related to rebirth that were in his environment at the time, and he introduced a lot of innovations. For example, how you get reborn, where you are reborn, when you are reborn. He basically was able to provide teachings that gave us more information on rebirth. And now there's an incredible amount of research on the topic of rebirth. And I love this topic here. So there's a doctor, Dr. Jim Tucker, child psychiatrist, works at the University of Virginia in a department that identifies and validates claims of rebirth or reincarnation in children. And he's a high-level guy there. Sits right there on the screen. He's an associate professor of psychiatry, and he's the director of the division that studies rebirth. And so far, they've gathered over 2,500 documented cases of children from all over the world who have detailed memories of former lives. And the children in the University of Virginia records typically began talking about their previous lives when they were 2 or 3 years old, and then it stopped around the age of 6 or 7. Dr. Tucker says that is around the same time that we all lose our memories of childhood. So no surprise. And when the department first learns about a child that may have memories of a past life, they check for fraud and they ask 2 questions. Do the parents seem credible? And could the child have picked up the memories through television? There was no internet for thousands of these cases. This happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of these cases. So could the child have picked up the memories from TV or overheard conversations or other ways? So, and if they can rule out fraud, then the next step is to interview the child, interview the family, get a detailed account about the previous life, and then the researchers look to find the deceased person whose life matches the memories. This last part is essential because otherwise all you have is a kid telling a story. It could be a fantasy. So after they hear the story or the stories and interview the parents and they think this is credible, they have to go look back to see who was this kid? Who was he or she? Almost 20% of the children have naturally occurring physical marks on their body that match scars and injuries from the past person. One boy recalled being shot in a previous life, and he has 2 birthmarks, a large one right over his left eye and a small round one on the back of his head, which lined up where the bullet entered and exited the person who was shot. A 2-year-old girl wakes up and starts speaking another language. This is a 2-year-old. another language from some other part of the world, never heard or spoken before in her family, from some other part of the world that they've never been to. A boy tells his father when he was having his diaper changed that he had changed his father's diaper a long time ago. The boy shared a ton of information about his deceased grandfather that he could not have known. Things from his grandfather's childhood, because in a previous life, he was the grandfather. A boy who has many nightmares of crashing in an airplane, vivid memories of his time in the Air Force in World War II. He was able to describe the plane and the accident that happened without any contact or talk about the incident in his environment or family. And a lot of these families were Christian families who had no belief whatsoever in rebirth or reincarnation. Or children go to another country, in another city, never having been there before, and they know where everything is. So this really mimics the way that they search for the rebirth of the Dalai Lama and other great lamas or realized beings in Tibet, in India, in Nepal. So some of you may have seen the movie The Little Buddha. If you haven't seen it, great movie. Unmistaken Child, another good movie. And in those countries, when a high-level lama or a teacher dies, before they die, they leave a letter or other indications where they will be reborn, in what city, in what part of the country, in what kind of family. And then a few years after they die, their students will follow the letter and the clues and look for their teacher who is now being reborn. So, and when they find the candidates, they give them tests to the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old to see what they remember from their previous lives. And if it's a match to their teacher who passed away a few years earlier, then they have found him. And then those children are trained to become great Buddhists and great practitioners so they can continue to help other living beings. So death and the death experience are topics of great study in Buddhism. Okay, next. So related to reincarnation and rebirth, in Tibetan Buddhism, we use a lot of symbols to educate, inspire, and we use them to advance our meditation. So a great educational tool is called a tanka. It's a Tibetan, and there's actually some hanging in my room here. Tanka is a Tibetan Buddhist painting on cotton, on silk, usually depicting a Buddhist deity, not a god, a deity, a scene, or a diagram with some kind of symbolic meaning, like a mandala. That's what a mandala is a diagram. So that's what tankas are, and a common, popular tanka is the Wheel of Life, and that's the one we're looking at now. And the Wheel of Life is a symbolic representation of our cyclic existence. We are born, we live, we die, and we get reborn again over and over. So it's cyclic. And the Wheel of Life is found on the outside walls of Tibetan Buddhist temples and monasteries. And this pictorial diagram presents basic Buddhist concepts that we just talked about, such as karma and rebirth, in a manner that can be understood by anyone. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on here in this tanka, but according to so where did tankas come from? Who developed these? According to a story, at the time of the Buddha, there was a king, King Rudrayana. He offered a gift of a robe with jewels with stones, diamonds, to another king, King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara was concerned that he did not have anything of equivalent value to offer as a gift in return. So Bimbisara went to the Buddha for advice. And the Buddha gave instructions to have the first drawing of the Wheel of Life made. And he told Bimbisara to send the drawing to Rudrayana as a gift. And the story is told that Rudrayana attained realization, nirvana, went through studying this drawing. So we're going to take a look at it now. So if you look at the center, the very, very middle, there are three animals, pig, snake, and a bird. And they represent the three poisons of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And under that influence, we create karma, as shown in the next layer of the circle. The next layer, you'll see it's a half circle with a black background and a half circle with a white background. So the half circle with the light background shows contented people, happy people, moving upwards to higher states, possibly higher realms. We'll talk about that in a moment. The other half circle, which is the dark, shows people in a miserable state being led downwards to lower states, possibly to the lower realms, propelled by their karma. The third, after you go to the next section where you have six shapes, so those symbolize the six realms of samsara, the six realms of existence, or the six worlds that you could reincarnate into. The three higher realms are you can reincarnate or be reborn as a god in the god realm, not the kind of god that we talk about when you think of someone that's all-knowing, the creator. It's a different type of god. We'll talk about that. Another realm is a demigod. Another realm is a human realm, which we are living in now. So the god realm, the gods lead long and enjoyable lives full of pleasure and abundance. But they spend their lives pursuing meaningless distractions, and they don't practice the Dharma. And when death comes, they're unprepared and they suffer tremendously and are reborn lower realms. The demigod realm, pleasure, abundance, almost like the gods, but they spend a lot of time fighting among themselves or making war. So they suffer from fighting and jealousy. The human realm, we suffer, some of us, from hunger, thirst, separation from friends, being attacked by enemies, and all the other suffering that we've talked about. But the human realm, we have the ability to practice the Dharma, to practice the Eightfold Path, because we're not completely distracted by pleasure or by pain. The three lower realms, animal realm, animals operate on instinct. They're not capable of rational thought or logic. So many wild animals suffer from being attacked and eaten by other animals. Hungry ghost realm, those hungry ghosts suffer from extreme hunger and thirst, always looking around for food and drink. And the last realm is the hell realm, where you endure unimaginable suffering. So now this doesn't just apply to where do you go when you die. The teachings are that now as humans, we are actually experiencing these realms right now. So when I'm greedy and I take a little bit too much or I eat too much, well, that's kind of the hungry ghost realm. Or if I act like an animal based upon instinct or attacking that type of thing, well, that's the animal realm. The God realm, people very wealthy that all they focus on is pleasure. So we can have those realms in our daily lives, in our states of mind, and they can come and they go depending on your state of mind and how you act. So that's part of the teachings as well. It's not just how you will be reborn, but what realm are you living in this moment? And then around the big circle, you'll see 12 ovals, and that shows us the process of karma or cause and effect in detail. We won't go through them all, but just as an example, ignorance creates karma. And in the top, very, very top, there's an orange figure there. It's a blind man. He's got a walking stick. Ignorance is represented by a blind person groping their way with a cane. So now the wheel is being held by a fearsome figure at the top, big, and everything's in his mouth. And that figure symbol is commonly depicted as the Lord of Death. And above the wheel is an image of the moon, all the way in the top left corner. And the moon represents liberation from the suffering of cyclic existence. And the upper right corner is the image of the Buddha pointing toward the moon. And this represents the path to liberation. So you don't have to stay in cyclic existence. You can get off the wheel. Okay, last one or two topics. Buddhists use mantras. Mantras are, and not only Buddhists, but all religions use mantras. Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism. It's a word or a sound that is repeated to aid concentration in meditation. It also teaches us something. It also allows us to meld, to connect our mind with another state of mind, usually the state of mind of a Buddha. So one of the most popular ones is Om Mani Padme Om. And you see it painted on flags, prayer flags, Tibetan prayer flags. And you go to India, Nepal, Tibet, you also see it carved on rocks and painted on rocks as well, all over, wherever you go. So I'll tell you what the Dalai Lama said about this mantra, Om Mani Padme Om. He said, it's very good to recite the mantra, but while you're doing it, you should be thinking on its meaning. The first Om, from Om Mani Padme Om, symbolizes the practitioner's impure body, speech, and mind, but also symbolizes the pure body, speech, and mind of a Buddha. And the next four syllables, so we have Om, then we have, is the first syllable, then we have Mani, Padme, Om, 6 syllables in total. So Mani means jewel, which symbolizes compassion. The altruistic, selfless intention to become enlightened so you can help others. Padme means lotus, which symbolizes wisdom. Lotus grows in mud and surfaces as a beautiful flower. Wisdom is a clear seeing of impermanence, a clear understanding of who we think we are, and understanding what's going on around us. So we have Om so far, impure and pure speech, body and mind. Then we have Mani, which represents a jewel or compassion, Padme, wisdom, impermanence. And then the final refers to union, the combination, the merging of compassion and wisdom or understanding of impermanence. And when you're able to do that, that's when you're the Buddha. So many Buddhists, especially from the Tibetan schools, will recite this over and over again, millions of times, once again to immerse ourselves in our mind in these teachings of impermanence, non-grasping, love, compassion for others and ourselves. And when you look at the Eightfold Path, you can see how this combination is interwoven and virtually everything we discussed tonight. So there's different types of Buddhism. These are just three of the main ones. Theravada Buddhism, and this is the countries where it is practiced primarily. Mahayana Buddhism, and then finally Tibetan Buddhism. And each of these types, they have the same teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Paths, and everything we've talked about, but they each emphasize different teachings. So the Theravada Buddhism is the oldest and it's the most conservative of the Buddha's paths. They follow the Noble Eightfold Path. They try to blow out the three fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance, and become enlightened. And once again, enlightenment means freedom from the cycle of rebirth, freedom from karma. Mahayana Buddhists, well, and once again, a very general description of these types of Buddhism. The more compassionate we become, the more positive force we build up. And as a result of that positive force or merit, that breaks down our mental blocks that would prevent us from understanding emptiness and impermanence. So if you have compassion, the more generosity, the more understanding, then it's easier to understand emptiness and impermanence. So compassion mindset leads to an understanding of emptiness or impermanence. People like Mother Teresa and Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, have great compassion and they understand the emptiness of everything. And just the reverse is true as well. When we understand impermanence and that everything is interdependent, or Thich Nhat Hanh says interbeing, that will naturally lead to compassion for everyone because we're all interconnected. Compassion leads to wisdom. Wisdom leads to compassion. Now, Tibetan or Vajrayana Buddhism, everything that I've said is part of that Tibetan or Vajrayana Buddhism. But here's the difference. And some people call Vajrayana the lightning path, like a flash of lightning, because it's so fast. And that includes the teachings and the practices from the other types of Buddhism, for sure, compassion and understanding emptiness. But instead of taking the step-by-step approach, we imagine ourselves, a Vajrayana or a Tibetan practitioner will imagine themselves as the Buddha or one of the many Buddhas that have lived or that we have studied. And we imagine ourselves or other enlightened deities or archetypes during the process of our practice. So, in other words, the practitioner, we use perception that we've already achieved enlightenment as the main vehicle of practice in order to attain enlightenment quickly. So this is an example of some of the symbols that we will meditate and visualize. I'll come back to that in a moment. So we visualize that we have the form, the state of mind, the feeling of a Buddha, which is very close to having an actual body of a Buddha that helps others with compassion and love. So in Vajrayana, the result is the path. The analogy I have is if you want to be like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, I'm putting that in there for my mother-in-law who's a golf fan and she's watching me now. After you practice all the basics of basketball, you then visualize yourself like Michael Jordan. You visualize yourself as the perfect basketball player. So if you want to be enlightened, you visualize yourself in great detail like an enlightened being. So once again, here are just a few of many deities that are visualized by practitioners as a way to connect your mind and your body with the mind of enlightenment. So in the top right corner, we have Guru Rinpoche, an enlightened being that brought Buddhism to Tibet in the 8th century. In the bottom left corner, we have Vajrakilaya, an archetype Buddha. So it's not someone who lived, but it's an archetype with certain aspects that we want to mimic, symbolic of the perfect Buddha. Bottom center is a refuge tree, a picture of all the great beings that existed since the beginning of time. In the bottom right corner is another archetype deity that represents great compassion, also known, that's Tara, T-A-R-A, also known as the Great Compassionate Mother and the Great Protectress, someone who protects. So a short story, last story of what the Buddha said right before he was dying. The Buddha had an attendant. His name was Ananda, and I think it was also his cousin. And the Buddha spoke to Ananda before he was dying, and he said, "It may be, Ananda, that some of you will say, without the Buddha, without the teacher, there is no teacher for us." And he said, "No, Ananda, you should not think in this way. Whatever doctrine, whatever discipline taught and made known by me will be your teacher when I am gone." I'll say it again. It may be, Ananda, that some of you will say, without the Buddha, there's no teacher for us. He says, no, don't think that way. Whatever doctrine, teachings, discipline that I taught, those will be your teacher when I am gone. And these were the very last word, the following are the very last words the Buddha spoke. He said, "Monks, this is my last advice to you. All things in the world are changeable. They are not lasting. Work hard to gain your own salvation. Do your best." And then the Lama passed into nirvana, not to be reborn. And the date that we have for him passing was 543 BC, before the Common Era, on a full moon. And in the Indian calendar, that's known as Vesak, and that's a day that we celebrate his passing. So that's the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And the good news is, if I don't know the answers, we have Martha here. We also have Cynthia, and they will know the answers. So once again, feel free to either turn your microphone on or type into the chat box if you have any questions at all. Okay, and while you're thinking of any questions, or you may not have any questions, I do want to thank Lama Lanong for his inspiration and allowing me to teach this class and really encouraging me to do so. And if you have, you want to participate in any of our events or classes, then you can go to the website, BuddhistSanDiego.com. Very easy to remember, BuddhistSanDiego.com, or our Facebook page for any events and classes. They're almost always free or by voluntary donation. Great. So it looks like we don't have any questions. That's because the presentation answered everything that you possibly could have thought. So thank you for that comment, Cynthia. Excellent class. I'll stay around another 30 seconds or a minute. But once again, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Wait. I think Emilia has a question.
Oh,
Hold
okay.
on.
Well,
I just can't hear her.
Yeah,
Hold on.
Sure.
A ver, Emilia, déjame te pongo volumen. Ya.
Pregunta.
¿Lista? Emilia. I think she hung up.
Okay.
She was going to ask something, but
No
I don't know
problem.
what happened.
Well, she can email you or email me, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Mordy. It was great.
Everyone. Thank you so much.
It.
Have a wonderful weekend. Appreciate it. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye.